Earlier this week, the Timberwolves and Celtics gave us arguably the best game of the entire season. Heading into this one, Boston was averaging over 126 per 100 possessions, which over an entire season would be the highest mark in NBA history. And on the other hand, the Wolves were allowing just under 103 points, the lowest by a team since the 2016 Spurs that won 67 games. I know it's a tiny sample, but essentially what I'm getting at is that nobody's been able to stop Boston, while nobody's been able to score on Minnesota. So naturally, that led to quite the battle. There was no Derek White for the Celtics, so they started their own double big unit with Horford and Porzingis on the floor together. Basically, the game started with 4 centers, which is incredibly unique in 2023. But that doesn't mean the individual matchups stayed positional. Actually, Boston put Porzingis on Minnesota's small forward Jaden McDaniels, with the idea that he could roam over to protect the rim. And Kristaps was basically just treating McDaniels as a complete and utter non-threat, giving him a ton of space to shoot whatever he wants. He started the game more than cold, shooting 2 of 10 in the first half, which included 1 of 5 from 3. So that meant he wasn't able to establish that outside threat and leave the Celtics more vulnerable in the paint. With the Unicorn playing the 3 on defense, that meant it was Jrue Holiday, yes, their starting point guard, who was defending Karl Anthony Towns. And Jrue's so uniquely switchable because he has one of the strongest lower bodies in the NBA, meaning that Cat really didn't have a mismatch to attack, but rather a brick wall to run into. By having Jrue on Cat, it kind of nullifies the impact that he can have as a screener. When he hands it off to Edwards, that just puts Holiday at the point of attack, making things even tougher for Ant to create. And that leaves Jaylen Brown, another strong, switchable wing, on Towns. And the only real advantage there is that he can shoot over the top. But he too had a cold shooting night, just 1 of 7 from 3. With this setup, the Celtics were able to string together some really nice defensive possessions early on. This one starts with Porzingis on McDaniels, putting a little bit of pressure, but not too much, as he sort of funnels him to the rim and sends away his layup. As soon as Horford secures possession of the ball, he looks to push the pace, and with Brown streaking past Ant on the wing, that leads to some easy points. Next time down the floor, it was Towns posting up Holiday, and with Porzingis shutting off the middle of the floor, he picks up his dribble, giving Jrue the opportunity to swipe down at it and force a turnover, which then creates another fast break as Brown lobs it up top for Tatum to bring home. They had no problem turning their good defense into quality transition offense going the other way. Porzingis is switched out to the perimeter on this one, and when Edwards beats him off the dribble, Brown's right there to steal his cookies, and just like that, he's got a runway straight to the basket for 2. So if both McDaniels and Towns were struggling this much, where would the Wolves get some offense? Well, that's an easy answer, because Anthony Edwards was on one. It started in semi-transition. Ant gets cross-matched with Horford and uses his speed to get to the lane, then goes to the Michael Jordan-esque hanging clutch finish for the and one. Next, it was a cross screen in the half court. As he catches the ball with momentum, Brown's caught behind the play, so he immediately attacks downhill. And when Holiday helps down low, he stops for a mid-range jumper off the glass. On this play, you're going to see them set up for a high ball screen, but instead of using Gobert as the screener, it's McDaniels with the idea of attacking Porzingis in that deep drop coverage. So when Edwards comes off the pick, there's nothing but space for him to step into an open triple. Ant played the entire first quarter and shot 100% from the field for 11 points. It would have been arguably the only positive for their offense if it wasn't for the play of Naz Reid. He checked into the game and hit 2 big threes, got to the line for a couple free throws, and gave us this ridiculous highlight where he throws a misdirection gather step to get by the hip of Kristaps before taking off for a vicious 2-handed slam. On the other side of things, Minnesota's anchor Rudy Gobert was matched up with Porzingis, and I think he used his length incredibly well to take the 7-3 sniper out of his comfort zone. Here he closes out to him on the top of the key, and when Kristaps puts it on the deck, he moves his feet to play the drive before getting a hand up on a step back jumper, and that's just an incredibly difficult shot. Even with Rudy playing great individual defense though, the value you get with a Porzingis type of big is that it stretches that rim protection to the perimeter, meaning that it's tougher for Gobert to cover for the rest of his team. You can see that on this play. He's forced to respect the weak side corner, so when Brown fakes Towns out of his shoes and drives, he's left with about 20 feet of space to get to the rim. It's a longer rotation for the big man, and when he gets there late, I'm sure we all know what happens next. Just for some perspective, here's what it looked like when it was Luke Kornet on the floor instead of Porzingis. Gobert starts on the block without having to worry about a perimeter recovery, so when Brown again gets that free lane to the basket, things don't look as easy. Whenever Gobert's defending a shooter and rotates early like that, there's that risk of leaving his man unattended. He slides down to tag a roller here, and nobody from the initial action peels to cover for him on the wing. Fortunately, Stevens doesn't see that, and when the 3-time Defensive Player of the Year isn't late, chances are you aren't scoring on him in the paint. In these spots, it's all about making the right reads. Sometimes you have to protect the rim at all costs, but also you don't want to get caught over helping, and that takes trusting your teammates. Gobert's initial instinct is to slide with the ball, but he recognizes that Kyle Anderson's got it covered, so he stays a little bit closer to his man on the perimeter, and that way Jalen doesn't have any available outlet after he drives. Here's another example. Drew's gonna post up Alexander Walker, and instead of selling out to the paint, Rudy stays at about the nail, trusting that his wings can offer resistance. When Naz Reid checked into the game with about 5 minutes left in the first, that's when we saw the Wolves switch up the matchups. Reid was now guarding Porzingis on the perimeter, with Gobert on a non-shooter in Lamar Stevens, which then enabled him to do what he does best: sit on the backline and clean up around the basket. With that level of rim protection behind the play, then the Timberwolves can get more creative and aggressive with their coverage on the perimeter, trapping the pick and roll, knowing that once the ball touches the paint, it's no longer as big of a threat. In general, I think the ability to toss out different schemes and coverages is one of the most important traits a defense can have, and in just 2 quarters of play, we saw Minnesota doing a little bit of everything, mixing it up to keep Boston's decision makers guessing. Of course, their go-to is the good old drop coverage. When you have arguably the best drop defender ever, that's a great way to shut off the paint. It's not just Gobert though, they can also drop with guys like Towns or Reid, not necessarily because of their own ability to protect the lane, but the devastating point of attack resistance you get from Jaden McDaniels. It looks like the pop is wide open, almost conceded, but Jaden just eats up that pass with his length and sharp hands. Here's one where the Celtics set up a double screen action, and you're going to see Cat back in that drop, while McDaniels jumps out in an aggressive hedge before recovering to Tatum. When the coverage is executed perfectly with no sort of miscommunication, it's hard to create an advantage, and you end up with Al Horford shooting a semi-contested 3 from above the break. When it was Naz Reid who was defending the screener, they were comfortable just letting him switch onto the ball, this time drawing a foul on Brown's off arm. And Naz moves well enough that you feel somewhat comfortable with him in these spots. I mean, just look at how he not only takes away Tatum's jumper and runs him off the line, but also beats him to the paint to erase a finish. Of course, with a big switched onto a wing, you're not going to win that battle every single time. I think Naz again does a good job of using his body and sliding his feet to protect the lane. Unfortunately, sometimes a scorer like Tatum's just gonna get a bucket regardless. But the idea isn't to switch everything and expect some 1 through 5 impenetrable lockdown defense at every single position. The reason they're comfortable throwing Gobert, Reid, or even Towns on the perimeter is that they know it's gonna stagnate the offense and turn it into a game of isolations. It's no secret that Boston's offense thrives off of screening, cutting, and ball movement, like on this great inbounds play where Reid's ready to jump out to the perimeter and help on a shooter, but forgets to watch his own man on a slip to the cup. Here's another one where the Celtics set up a screening action, this time to free up Brown for a 3. And with two bigs playing defense, you can give up the switch and the offense doesn't really gain anything from it. But by dropping back in a more traditional coverage, then you allow them to do exactly what it is they intended to do. The first quarter was extremely gritty. There was decent pace, but not the best efficiency. Minnesota shot the ball well, but kept turning it over, and Boston just wasn't able to generate the type of looks they wanted to consistently, which led to a 3-point deficit heading into the second. Luckily for them, the Wolves would be starting this quarter with Edwards on the bench after he played the entire first, and in this time their offense was a complete disaster. They couldn't create anything meaningful at all. They went scoreless in the first 3 minutes and would finally get on the board with a great set after a timeout, where Conley cuts down the middle and moves into what looks to be a back screen for McDaniels to cut, which draws the help of Drew down low, only to cut into a pin down of his own, which leaves him wide open for 3. But while that initial collapse was happening, Jason Tatum was starting to turn it up a notch through his constant attacking of the rim. It started with a high ball screen early into the offense, and keep in mind Gobert also isn't on the floor, so that protection on the backline is a lot more vulnerable. Next time down, he again attacked early in the offense, putting pressure on the rim, and although McDaniels is there to meet him this time, he's able to finish around him pretty easily. You can see the immediate difference when Rudy checks back in. Tatum gets by his man in early offense, but now he's running into a tower in front of the basket, and things don't look so easy. With Boston's offense starting to get some consistent points on the board, the Wolves had to rush to get Edwards back in the game, re-entering with just over 8 minutes left in the half. And just like Rudy on defense, you could immediately see the difference. It wasn't just his scoring this time, but his creation and the pressure he applies in general, consistently putting the defense in rotation and making the right reads to get his team quality shots. Just for some perspective, Minnesota in those first 4 minutes without Ant scored 3 points in 8 possessions, or had an offensive rating of 37.5. In the 8 minutes with Ant, they were up to 20 points in 17 possessions, or an offensive rating of about 118. The struggles in the beginning put them at a major disadvantage, but they were able to close the gap enough towards the end of the half that they only found themselves down 3 heading into the break. Now, if I told you that they started the third quarter off strong by running their offense through Rudy Gobert, would you believe me? Their opening set was a high-low action to get the ball to Rudy in the low post, and when Kristaps slides down to help in the paint, that leaves McDaniels wide open on the wing, and all of a sudden he's punishing that softer coverage. When I say running the offense through Gobert, I don't mean he's isolating and creating like that every time, just that it kind of revolves around his skill set. Like here when he sets a hard screen and rolls, that interior presence collapses the paint, even though he doesn't have the ball yet. And guess who that gets open for 3? The reason the defense has to react to Gobert rolling to the basket in this way is because even if he is a very limited offensive player, that massive finishing will always lead to efficient opportunities like streaking down the middle for a lob in semi-transition. This third quarter was a complete masterclass by Gobert. He played all 12 minutes, and in addition to the offensive utility, he looked like he was in Defensive Player of the Year form. Of course, the big draw is that 1-of-1 paint protection in drop coverage, and he starts this one all the way out at the 3-point line, while Tatum turns the corner with speed. He backpedals to stay in between Tatum and the basket, and makes it a tough finish down low. Here's another one where he drops, but doesn't overhelp to the ball because Kyle Anderson is still in the play. And when it gets moved to Porzingis, he's gonna try to isolate the big man, twisting and turning his way into that unblockably high release fadeaway, except that's not unblockable to a 7'10" wingspan. Gobert's activity and mobility in the third looked noticeably better to me than any game he played in last season. This time he's helping at the nail with his man just one pass away, and on the closeout he actually leaves his feet as he bites on an up fake. Porzingis then drives, only for Rudy to recover, get back in front, before completely smothering his attempt at the rim. It wasn't just Gobert though. This roster is filled with great defensive personnel. This time Tatum's going to use a ball screen from Holiday to get a favorable switch onto Conley, except now that the offense wants it, they aren't going to concede that switch. And with a screen navigator at the level of McDaniels, there's no advantage created. Another great wing defender on the squad is Nickeil Alexander-Walker. Here he is matched up with Tatum, and again, instead of giving up the switch, he's gonna fight over the top and draws an illegal screen. This time he picks up Jaylen Brown in semi-transition, holds his ground while Brown tries to back him down, with Rudy showing his length, and although he's still able to create a decent amount of space, again, it's stagnating the offense. You aren't gonna win every battle, but time and time again, the Wolves were able to bait the Celtics into playing hero ball, almost every single possession devolving into an isolation. Like here, where it's actually Jordan McLaughlin who got some run, easily getting around a screen so that Gobert can stay and drop, and recovering to get in front of Pritchard, who's now going to try to take him one-on-one. That's exactly what you want from your defense. Maximizing your personnel also requires knowing the weak points. Here's a play where Conley's left one-on-one with Drew, and in single coverage, he has no problem backing his way into some easy offense. So next time down the floor, they adjusted in real time. When he posts up Conley, now Cat is aggressively rotating over from the weak side to protect the paint, with Anthony Edwards sitting in between two shooters so that he can close out on any potential kickouts or pick up any cuts. The Wolves won this third quarter by a differential of 8, holding Boston to just 26% from the field and 19 points. But with Gobert needing some extended rest after a full third quarter, the Celtics had a great chance to strike and took full advantage. They opened the quarter with a double screening action, and Tatum sets a hard pick so that the Wolves are either forced to switch or give Pritchard space. That confusion leaves Reed on Pritchard while Tatum comes off a back screen from Hauser, who then runs off a pin down, and although it was some pretty decent defense, just simply better offense. With Towns on the floor, Minnesota really likes to hedge the pick and roll, but Boston is one of the best teams in the league when it comes to extending advantages. So as soon as Horford gets the ball in the short roll, he's kicking it out to Pritchard, who makes the extra pass to Hauser, and that's another triple for him. Primarily though, this fourth quarter offense was a product of Jason Tatum's brilliance, this time attacking a scramble with an up fake straight into a couple crossovers to get the step on Reed all the way to the bucket for 2. Next, it starts with one of those early ball screens as soon as he crosses half court, but the Wolves don't want to give up that favorable switch, so Tatum's able to turn the corner and use Jaden's momentum against him with a little shoulder bump and step back midi. So on the next play, when they again set up that high ball screen, they're gonna concede the switch, with Reed again picking up Tatum, and he just patiently walks it back to the perimeter for a huge 3 to take the lead. Tatum scored a very efficient 12 points in the fourth, but that doesn't necessarily mean things were easy. McDaniels was all over him with constant pressure, using his lateral quickness and length to disrupt his flow as much as possible. On the other end, it was again Edwards who was doing almost all of the creating, and it wasn't really much scoring, but applying pressure. The Celtics were playing him pretty aggressively in an attempt to slow him down, and that just opened up more stuff for the guys around him. The game was all tied up at 98 with 2 minutes remaining, and that's when Jaylen Brown hit a big time corner 3 to take control. But Ant came right back with a perimeter isolation, using his explosive first step to get by Brown's hip, which pulls help from the corner and leaves McDaniels on an island, and he knocks it down to tie it back up. From that point on, nobody could put the ball in the basket. It started with a Tatum isolation against McDaniels, and he's able to get to a good spot to rise up for a jumper, but it doesn't fall. Then you have Minnesota going to their 2-man game with Conley and Gobert, which actually gets them a very favorable switch, and Conley isolates, blowing by Porzingis to set up his signature right-hand floater, but just leaves it short. Both offenses ended up stagnating into a competition of who could be the hero and end the game, which resulted in 1 minute and 40 seconds of scoreless basketball. That three for McDaniels to tie it up at 101 was the last bucket of regulation, and this one was headed to overtime. The Wolves opened up OT with a post-up for Cat, who turns in does his best impression of Marshawn Lynch as he picks up his 5th foul. Then on the other side of things, he picks up Tatum on a switch, gets beat off the dribble, but with Gobert in position to shut off the rim, Tatum instead turns around for a jumper, which Towns of course swipes down on to pick up a dumb 6th foul. In 1 minute of play, the guy fouled twice and was out of this game having scored just 7 points. Not his best performance. Luckily for them, Anthony Edwards was playing his best basketball. He starts this one by coming off a handoff and the Celtics switch, so now he's able to attack Al Horford with his speed, driving in close for a tough floater. He did it on the defensive end as well, picking up Tatum on a switch, and again, look at how stagnated the offense is, just standing around as they watch their star turn it into a game of one-on-one. Ant gets the better of him here, shutting off his drive, stripping the handle, and aggressively getting after that loose ball to force a jump. They win the jump, starting some fast-paced offense going the other way, and Edwards kicks it ahead to Conley for a transition 3. Wolves lead by 1, and from that point on, it was all Anthony Edwards.
Edwards sizing up Horford, pull up, got it! Mid-range, another double-double.
Drew Holiday trying to house Mike Conley that time. Mike said no.
Edwards, yes sir! Edwards spinning, putting it up, and in fuego!
While Ant was busy taking over on offense, they were also locking the Celtics down. Conley had a few huge defensive plays, starting with this one where he draws an illegal screen at the point of attack. Then it was an isolation against Holiday, moving his feet well to not give up a lane and playing physical enough that it's a pretty tough look. Next time down, Boston again fell back on the Tatum isolation, but with Jaden McDaniels on him, and he just gets absolutely clamped, although he does almost hit the tough 3. And finally, to cap off this run, it was a Rudy Gobert switch onto Jaylen Brown, shutting off the paint and heavily contesting his turnaround jumper with that length. Still, the Celtics just wouldn't go away. Down 5 with 40 seconds left, Edwards turns it over, leaving Tatum with some easy fast break offense. And just like that, it's a 3-point game with enough time to get a stop. Life has a funny way of making things come full circle though, because the very thing that was a catalyst for Boston's early success, the shooting struggles of Jaden McDaniels, would also lead to their demise, as he's the one who isolates and hits a dagger from the mid-range. Tatum and Brown both played great, but it wasn't enough to overcome Minnesota's defense as a team, getting held to just 98 points per 100, 28 points worse than what they averaged heading into it. On the other side of things, they couldn't survive the constant barrage of Anthony Edwards, who finished with 38, 9, and 7 on 68% true shooting. The Wolves moved to 4-2, now having given both the Nuggets and Celtics their first loss of the season, and remain the best defense in the NBA for the time being. If you enjoyed this breakdown, make sure to drop a like, subscribe, and turn my post notifications on to be first on more content. If you're interested in my more in-depth research, make sure to check out my website and social media profiles. You can find those links in the description. Feel free to let me know down in the comments what you thought of this game. As always, I hope you all have a great day, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.